Hello, and thanks for tuning into Compass Media Elections Special. We had planned for this show to have a panel of three independent EU candidates to present themselves in their best light without any conflict, but to be able to present themselves and what they stand for and why they're running in the EU parliamentary elections. Unfortunately, technical glitches has meant that two of our panelists can't participate in the show today, but we are joined by Mary Fitzgibbon, and Mary is running as an independent for the European parliamentary elections. And so she now has an opportunity for the next 15 to 20 minutes to tell us why she's running in the European elections and why the people in her constituency should vote for her. Mary, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Finbar. And I'm disappointed that I don't get to be with John Waters and Malachy Steenson, but I wish them the best on Friday, the 7th of June. We need candidates who will serve Ireland's interests.
Mary, what constituency are you running in?
Okay, I'm running in Ireland South, and that covers the counties of Munster. It also covers the counties of Wicklow, Wexford, Carlow, and Kilkenny.
And could you tell us why you're running in the Europeans? What has spurred you on to take what is a very brave step to put yourself forward like this to represent your community? What is it, if you could encapsulate it in a minute or two, what is it that has brought you to this place today?
Right. So I've been awake at night for many months now, tossing over in my mind the direction that Ireland is headed in. And I'm really concerned that in 5 years or less than 5 years, we're going to see a radically different Ireland than we have known ever before, given the unprecedented levels of not only legal immigration, but also illegal immigration coming into Ireland, and also the emigration of our young Irish people, particularly that demographic that are young and that maybe are educated and that would like to start families here. So I see that the European Union has centralized a lot of control. We predicted that following the Treaty of Lisbon. So what I would like to see is that we would represent our country's interests in Europe. And so for me, I see things very much from how the legislation impacts the human being at a personal level. And as a nurse and a midwife, and somebody who has taught nurses for 20, 30 years, and midwives too, I am looking at how the legislation impacts people on the ground. And what I see is a disconnect from Europe, and also the laws that are being passed, the 70% of the laws that are coming from Europe are impacting us not in a way that is serving our interests. So in 1972, when we first joined, we joined in 1973, we had the referendum in 1972, when we first joined the European communities, as it were there. The biggest issues facing this country were emigration of our young people, and also agriculture. We needed a bigger market, and our economy wasn't in a great place. So 50 years later, where are we? Agriculture is really being impacted. You only need to ask any farmer who is experiencing overregulation. They're worried about the nitrates derogation. They're looking at environmental unfairness, being blamed for everything to do with the environment. And also when you look at the numbers of young people leaving Ireland, that is back to the times. I remember in 1987, I think they called it again Black 87, because 50,000 young people left Ireland. Now we're looking at 64,000 last year, not a mind. So I teach nurses, and what I'm seeing now is that our student nurses about to graduate feel not that they would all love to travel. That's great. It's great to travel. But now they feel they really have no option but to travel, that the situation in Ireland doesn't afford them a future. So Finbar, if you're asking me, I just felt compelled that to put my name forward. You could say that I'm probably it's the last thing I need, having a family and having a full-time job teaching nursing, and especially during marking season when I'm trying to mark and we have examination boards. But you have to stand up when you feel that you're called, or you feel called to stand up and do something. You've got to, desperate times call for desperate measures. And I believe we're at this incredible time in our history now where it can be make or break on Friday unless we get a change.
So those key issues that I take, there's a lot to unpack there, but the key issues I take from what you're saying is immigration, emigration, and farming as your three key issues. If you were elected into the EU Parliament, Mary, what exactly would you do? What actions would you take as an EU Parliament, as an independent EU parliamentarian, to try to formulate and create the change?
Yes, well, number one thing, if elected, I hope to be elected, yes, of course, it is important that we align with the MEPs of similar mindset. So in the European Parliament, there are 7 political groupings. Some of them are Independent and Democracy and European Conservatives and Reformers. So there are many that have the similar mindset to us, that are seeing our sovereignty eroded and that the laws being passed by the European Parliament aren't serving our country's interests. So for me, I would be aligning with a political grouping that best focuses on sovereignty, immigration, neutrality, family life, agriculture, and small business. And there are those groupings. Now, there are 7% of MEPs that don't align. They remain independent within the Parliament. So one of the things we need to do too, and there are moves underfoot, is to enable the parliamentarians to initiate legislation in the Parliament. We can do that in our national Dáil here, but we can't do it in Europe. So the legislation is developed by the Commission or is initiated by the Commission, and we get to vote on the legislation. We can either make amendments or we can vote against it. So now we need to work together to actually get moves to initiate legislation. Because what we're seeing is, we saw with the EU Migration and Asylum Pact that was passed at EU level, I believe that doesn't serve our interests. We should be like Denmark. We fought hard in the Lisbon Treaty for opt-outs, and we should be opting out of the EU Migration and Asylum Pact and making laws that are in the interests of this country, particularly around the massive, unprecedented inward migration we're seeing. So I would be in favor of restoring sovereignty. So it's great to have this cooperation in Europe, but not where the legislation impacts us. The same with the nature restoration law that was voted on in the Parliament, particularly the EPP group, the European Parliament, European People's Parliament is the grouping that's the largest. It may not be after this election, and they voted for the nature restoration law. So that has the farmers upset here. We could see also there was the move on the Green Deal, and we could see the protests right across Europe where the farmers were up in arms. They were a massive protest. They weren't real well covered here in the media, but they managed to get a pushback on the Green Deal. And I know in Ireland, they say that if we don't retain the nitrates derogation for farming, we are going to see serious problems with farming. And even with the small businesses, the headlines the other day was that 60% of small to medium-sized enterprises without support will not be able to survive this year. So we don't want this corporatism, this model where small, medium-sized family businesses are impacted. So we want to see laws that actually support not only the farmers and the businesses, but also family life. I can't understand at the moment how we have a demographic implosion across Europe and across a lot of the world. Ireland has had a 30% decline in its birth rates since 1991. Since 1991, we have been below replacement level. Our total fertility rate at the moment is 1.54. And so at the same time, on the 11th of April, the MEPs, 12 of Ireland's 13 MEPs, voted that abortion up to birth become a human right in the Charter of Fundamental Human Rights. So on the one hand, here we are seeing a fall in birth rates, a huge fall in our birth rates. Then they're pushing for abortion up to birth for no reason or any reason, as a human right. And me as a midwife, that is deeply disturbing, because what we really need are pro-family, pro-natalist policies. We're seeing that happening in Italy and in Hungary, in France to some degree. We need it here in Ireland. The families in Ireland are not being supported. We haven't had a rise in child benefit in 13 years, even to keep in line with inflation. And what we're looking at is the average woman is having about 1 to 1.5 children. We need 2.1 for replacement level. And if they are having children, now they're emigrating. We can see 64,000 left Ireland last year. The majority of them heading to Australia are young nurses, midwives, doctors. 441 doctors out of 725 applied for visas to go to Australia. And again, we have 1,600 nurses who graduate. Many of those are not staying in nursing. Many of them are leaving. So there are real issues here around social cohesion, around our country's future, and the demographic changes that are being felt by everyone. So in the Examiner, yes.
What do you say, Mary, to people who say, so there's a whole list of issues there, and I think you're pretty clear where you stand on most of those issues. What do you say to people who actually argue that the EU parliamentarians really have no power and that they can't really influence policy at a on the ground level in their own constituencies when they go to Europe, and even some of them disappear, and maybe they're sticking out pictures of cannabis plants onto their Twitter account every morning, but other than that, they're not doing very much. What do you say to people who argue that the EU Parliament is emasculated, that it has no powers?
To a certain degree, there is some merit in what you're saying, because I would have campaigned against the Lisbon Treaty. And what we saw there was more control. And the Nice Treaty, we said the chance to become a second-class citizen. So what we're seeing is the Commission has an awful lot of control. But in saying that, never underestimate the power of the individual who is willing to put a country's interest first, and who is willing to work hard and to speak up and to review legislation, to work together. And one of the last speakers in the European Parliament, just before the closing session, or at the closing session, said, we are going to get a shift on the 7th of June. And we are going to get a shift where Ursula von der Leyen may not get a second term. The EPP grouping, which is the largest, may not be the largest grouping. So we're moving to seeing groups like Identity and Democracy and the European Conservative and Reformists holding the balance of power. And when you align, when you work together, because there is common ground, there's common ground in Europe on issues like sovereignty, immigration, neutrality, family life, agriculture, you can make changes. In fact, I will be hoping to speak shortly with 2 former MEPs and ask them exactly what their experience was like in the Parliament about bringing about change, and especially change that we need in Ireland's interests.
You mentioned neutrality there, Mary, a couple of times, in fact, since the show began. The EU, a key feature of the EU has been an increased militarization, especially over the last 4 to 5 years. Many would accuse the EU of participating in the campaign of agitation that has led to the Ukraine conflict, and is also involving itself through Ursula von der Leyen in support of Israel when it comes to the Israeli genocide on Gaza. What's your position on EU militarization, and what would you do if you get elected to bolster or to support your position on militarization?
Well, Ireland is a neutral country for starters, and we should be at the forefront of efforts to bring about peace. I saw yesterday in Hungary, they had a massive rally for peace. That is what we should be doing. We need to stop this war machine. We do not need to escalate the conflicts that already exist. The European community, in a sense, came out of a devastating Second World War, where thousands and thousands of civilians, innocent civilians, and young men gave their lives. And we don't want that. I am sure, as a mother myself and many mothers in Ireland and across Europe, they don't want to see their young people involved in a war. There are huge profits to be made from the war machine, from the sale of armaments. The conflict in Ukraine is complex, but it has been going on since 2014. And I would encourage people to read about the conflict and to listen to some of the documentaries on the conflict there. Particularly, Oliver Stone made a very interesting documentary, Ukraine on Fire. And Professor John Mearsheimer, the University of Chicago, he also gave a lecture back in 2014 about the West's involvement in the escalation of problems in the Ukraine. So the war has been going on there. 14,000 had lost their lives in the Donbass. And I know 2 doctors that I helped to get asylum back in 2005 from that region. And the people in the Ukraine knew that there was going to be an escalation, that war was coming. But what we need to do is we need to look at the reasons why that happened. And we have to stop further escalation and provocation and funding of arms, and say there was an opportunity for a peace deal with Boris Johnson. He didn't, they stopped that. So again, the same thing, we have Ursula von der Leyen coming out. She has been ratified by the European parliamentarians, but she's really not elected by the people in Ireland, in a sense. So she was first out to, again, push support for Ukraine and push support for Israel. But that, again, may not be reflective of the sentiment on the ground in European countries. And we have seen some pushback by countries that don't want to further cause escalation of these conflicts. In our university, we had a display in the library of young lives lost in the Ukrainian, in the war. And it is so sad to see these beautiful young people. And they don't have the demographics either in the Ukraine, nor do they have them in Russia. Now, Russia has nuclear weapons, we know that, and has many advanced, armaments. But for young people to be involved in a war, you look at mothers in Ukraine and Russia, they might have one child, and their child, they are maybe childless now because of a war that could be prevented or stopped if there was the political will to do so. So I am in favor of being the peacemakers. We want to have a peace machine, not a war machine, and to stop this escalation of conflicts. And again, in the Middle East, we don't want to see innocent civilians killed in their thousands. We don't want that. We want to bring about every conflict. There has to be a resolution. There has to be a talking around the table. And we need to increase our efforts to bring that about now, rather than down the road when this conflict could escalate to a level of World War III. And I think it is a very serious situation, because at a town hall event, Deirdre Clune, who is not standing as MEP, impressed on the people there when she was asked what was the most pressing issue. She said people are not understanding how serious the situation is in the Ukraine. And how, and we can see, we have all of these discussions in Ireland about our neutrality, and Micheál Martin said we don't want a backward idea of sovereignty and neutrality. There's increased alignment with these discussions around our maybe links with NATO, and people are deeply uncomfortable about that. And at the same time, given the space we're in, if there was to be a nuclear conflict, I don't know where Ireland how Ireland would survive in all of that. I mean, the spectre of a nuclear war is so horrific that we must do everything to stop this conflict. War is a defeat for humanity, and we must do everything in our power to stop it.
And we saw only recently, in the last week, Ukrainian forces using Western weapons to attack Russia's nuclear warning system. And that's very worrying in itself. A final question, Mary, before I leave the floor open to you for a closing minute. A final question, and going back to the original subject matter that we opened up on, which is mass immigration into Ireland. There is a danger, is there not, that some of the language by some of those very active against mass immigration endangers people. It labels people as everybody as sexual predators. It labels all immigrants as criminals, and in doing so, it increases the risk or the danger level of innocent people into the future being attacked, being physically attacked, being verbally abused on the street, things like that. When, to my mind, and I'm not saying this is your or anybody else's opinion, but to my mind, the politicians are the people that we really need to be aiming our ire and our angst towards. Do you, first of all, acknowledge that there is a danger that if people are not very careful with their language, that there could be unnecessary death and murder and victimization on the streets of people coming into the country? And secondly, what would you do in the European Parliament to mitigate that, if you do acknowledge that danger?
I think if we go back to our roots, our country is a Christian country, and we have two tenets. One is love of God and one of love of neighbor. So we need to see each individual and look at them. They all have inherent dignity. I mean, I am for the right to life for the whole of life, and each individual we say is created in the image of God. They have their own unique dignity, and we have to see that there are many, many genuine people who are coming here in search of a better life, but not only a better life, but they are fleeing persecution. Because when you get incredible political turmoil or famine in countries, yes, they have no option, or they have to flee war. They have to come to another country. And at the same time, we have to also be mindful that we are not creating pull factors that would make us a very attractive country to come to, especially around economic migration. There are legal ways to enter Ireland if you are coming in search of economic opportunity. So Leo Varadkar said that the vast majority were coming because of economic reasons, not because they were fleeing war or persecution. I think we have always extended the hand of friendship to people in need. This goes back to my father would have been involved with the Hungarian refugees after the 1956 uprising through the Red Cross. We had an unprecedented level of migration from the north to the Republic when there were the Troubles in the late 60s and 70s. So they were housed, many of them came to live in Kerry and in the Republic. Then we had the Vietnamese. I remember meeting the Vietnamese. And then I mentioned to you in 2005, I helped two Ukrainian doctors who had fled for their lives from Ukraine because they uncovered the sale of baby body parts. I don't have time to go into this, but anyone can look it up about the sale of fetal organs. So we must always keep in mind the humanitarian need to reach out to those in real need. I mean, we have had so many people in Ireland go to countries that have experienced famine and devastation and earthquakes to help them. And we can also extend the hand of friendship here. There is always an opportunity to help those who are genuinely fleeing persecution. And in the European Parliament, yes, we need to look at how we can cope with these levels of migration, how we can deal with that in terms of support for people who are genuinely fleeing persecution. But we should be also at the forefront in the European Parliament of trying to get resolutions to conflicts in those countries that tend to drive the people out of the countries. And we know that Gaddafi said that Libya, if it became destabilized, which it was the bulwark against massive African migration. And I know I met a Nigerian, and he said to me, Mary, everybody wants to come to Europe. And when you get to Europe, they think that you have made it. So we need to work to help the people in those countries that are facing maybe famine, earthquakes. And there's also human trafficking. There's a vast amount of money being made by criminal gangs. People are paying an awful lot of money to be trafficked in very precarious situations across countries, across the Mediterranean. And then they're coming to us here in Ireland. But Ireland isn't the first port of entry. It's not the first safe country that they land in. And we must enforce the Dublin III Convention, where they look for asylum in the country that they arrive in. So what you're saying is really, we are all mindful of genuine need and the genuine refugee. But then there is another element, it's economic migration or pull factors, where we can see many countries have very generous benefits. So we have to have common sense and compassion, and we cannot undermine social cohesion in our own country, because what we have is our young Irish people now leaving Ireland in search of a better life, and other people coming in here in search of a better life. And I would think that we need to look at our own Irish people and meet their needs and support families and farmers and business, and restore sovereignty so that the best interests are served for those who have grown up in this country and who have paid their taxes and who go back generations and have worked the land here.
Okay, Mary, if you want to close up with a final statement of any sort to your constituents about why they should vote for you this coming Friday, you can fire away. You've got the floor for 30 seconds to a minute.
Well, I'm the only nurse and midwife running in the entire of the constituencies. And I'm also, what one person said, we need an Irish mammy in Europe. I would see things from the perspective of the human being. And I would ask you, I will not only act in your interests and serve you, but I will also care for you in Europe, as I have done so for 36 years in my profession as a nurse and a midwife. And I want, as an independent, I will not be beholden to any party. The party's over now. This is very serious stuff. This is not for celebrity videos about snacks or TikToks with ice cream. This is very serious. We are looking at difficulties with neutrality. We're looking at an escalation of war. We're looking at high cost of living, unprecedented migration, and unprecedented emigration, those leaving our shores, a demographic implosion. So I'm asking you, I promise on my honor, I will do everything I can to serve you in Europe.
Mary Fitzgibbon, good luck in the elections on Friday. Thanks for joining us today. And hopefully we'll join you over the next few weeks to have a debrief on those elections. Once more, Mary, thanks for joining us.
And thank you, Finbar. A pleasure.